a 23-year-old young guy, young man that really changed the course of our country. But if he had died early on in 23, I don't know, we'd have this great country. I really don't. Hey, welcome back to Luso, a show about our great country and about teaching the next generation about the God stories from the American Revolution, really from the God stories from the beginning of where our country started. Again, if you tune in, 83% of Americans have no idea why we fought the American Revolution. Some people don't even know when the American Revolution was. Like, where did it start? But we are about to celebrate our nation's 250th anniversary, which is why we have this awesome cake here. At every show, I'm really tempted to take a little something. Man, that cake is good. But we're not going to cut the cake yet. I'm just trying to taste it, making sure it's good. We're not going to cut the cake. We're going to cut it on July 4th, 2026. That's a long time from now. So I'm just tasting it. But anyway, we're also here sipping on a little bit of coffee. Woo! I think coffee and cake go hand in hand. I'm just saying, just throwing that out there. We are unraveling some of the God stories from the American Revolution, and we're just doing a countdown since we got 30 days in December. 30 different God stories. My ancestor, Peter Francisco, amazing God story. We're going to get to that a little bit later. Today, we're going to be talking about another just a wild, wild God story that you may or may not know about. But before I do that, I figured I'd mention once again, really good book, 1776, that Hollywood has had the film rights, HBO to be more specific, film rights for 20 years. They're not making it. I don't know why, but that's why we're here. We're just unraveling, talking about what's going on in 1776, because, hey, if our nation's 250th anniversary is coming up, you should know. I should know. We should look back. Look, we don't know where we're going unless we know where we came from. All right? Remember that. We don't know where we're going unless we know where we came from. So that's why it's good to look back. And, of course, I'll give a little, shameless plug to a book that I wrote about my ancestor from the American Revolution. He was the giant. Think Shaquille O'Neal, the giant of the American Revolution. Anyway, Luso, if you wonder what Luso means, it just means a badass warrior from the American Revolution. Just saying, just throwing that out there. So today, I just want to unpack another incredible story from there. So story number two, God's story number two, is just a 23-year-old young guy, young man that really changed the course of our country. But if he had died early on in 23, I don't know, we'd have this great country. I really don't. So what we know is George Washington, before he's famous and all that, before he became the general, all right, so we're going back in time before 1776. So I'm going to give you a God story that's actually before 1776, but obviously, as we all know, he was the general and that oversaw the American Revolution with the ragtag army. That's what we were talking about yesterday, the farmers and whatnot. But before he got to 1776, let's go back in time to July 9th, 1755, and a battle that took place just outside of Pittsburgh, okay? Now, this is the French and Indian War, in case, again, you're not familiar with our history. So this, again, let me step back. On a global scale, the 7-Year War was going on at this time. And so the British Empire, they're just trying to take out everybody all over the world. They got forces in India. They got forces in South America. They got forces everywhere. They are just trying to take on the French. They don't like the French. And they're just taking them out. So here in North America, in case you're not familiar, North America, the French and Indian War, of obviously the British Empire going head-to-head with the French colonials at that time. So George Washington, young 23-year-old kid, he had been a land surveyor. And so General Braddock from the British Army, he comes over, he's presiding over the entire British forces to take on the French army. And he actually takes on George Washington, young kid, like I said, before he's a general. He's 23-year-old, and here he is at this battle in July 9th, 1755. And what we know is that the French and the Indians, they like to just kind of almost do a a tactical maneuver on the British. They didn't saw it. Matter of fact, if you watched the movie The Patriot, you saw this happen on The Patriot. Now, that was 1776. But the British Army saw this happen during the French and Indian War, but this was probably one of those early times where General Braddock was not ready for it. So he's got his troops of about 1,300 going through a thick forest. Again, the Allegheny County area, if you're familiar out there in Pennsylvania. And they're going through a thick forest, and roughly 800 French and Indian soldiers are all hiding in the trees, and they have no idea. So the British force had no idea these guys are there. Well, around 1 p.m. on that day, just all hell breaks loose, firepower, and hundreds of British officers and soldiers are just dropping. They're trying to get in order. You know, you've seen them. I mean, obviously they're in the forest with red coats, bright red coats. That would have been like, tactical error number one in my book, right? But so obviously the French and the Indians are behind the trees, and they're just firing on them. Boom, boom, boom. I mean, they're just like picking them off. Hundreds of them are just dropping. So they get into an order, a battlefield. Now, General Braddock asks Washington, young 23-year-old Washington, to get some orders to the other side of the field, because you got 1,300 men. They're spread out. They're trying to get into a position as this total chaos is going on. And Washington, not General Washington, young 23-year-old Washington is on a horse riding through the chaos and delivering orders to the guys. They're like, all right, hey, flank, move your guys. So as he's doing that, in the midst of all that, it was obviously a hand of God that he wasn't killed. I mean, it was an easy target for the British to just, let's hit that guy. Sorry, not the British, the French. So the French and the Indians easily could see Washington. Let's just shoot that guy. He's on a horse. He's running across the field on his horse. Take out that young guy, whoever that guy is. That's George Washington. So he's charging across the field, and multiple times a musket ball is flying through his coat, through his hat. I mean, it's crazy. He has multiple horses shot out from underneath of him. General Braddock himself is killed. Another job. By the end of this whole thing, you've just got hundreds of dead men, British men, everywhere. Hundreds of them. George Washington, young 23-year-old guy, he somehow miraculously lives, even though he's charging on his horse through the midst of the chaos and the smoke and the fire. He should have been shot. Well, his horse was shot out from underneath him multiple times, but he himself should have been killed. He gets back at the end of the day. He actually helps an orderly retreat so that they could have somewhat of an army to fight again. They lose this battle. They're trying to take over Fort Duquesne from the French and the Indians, and they lose this battle completely, dismal, but he was able to successfully at least get some of the guys off the field and get back. And when he gets back, he sees all the holes in his clothing, in his hat. And then what we know historically is the Indian chief later tells a missionary who comes to the tribe, he tells him, I told all of my guys to focus and fire at that young George Washington. And none of them could hit him. None of them. He said, I literally had them all aimed at him. Not one of them could hit this soldier, George Washington, as he's charging across the field. And what the chief said, and again, look this up. The chief says to the missionary, he says, I knew it was the Great Spirit that protected him. And I knew that we could not take him out. If the Great Spirit protects him, we're not going to be able to take him out. And so he told his soldiers, stop shooting at him. Just stop shooting at him. Because clearly, Providence has a hand over him. As a Christian, I look at that and I'm like, that's extraordinary. That is absolutely amazing that young George Washington could have easily been taken out 22 years before the American Revolution even started. He could have been gone. So that when the American Revolution started, we wouldn't have had the general that we know today that's on our coins, right? Or on our dollar bills. General Washington, and became our first United States president, could have been taken out years before, but the hand of God was all over him. I think that's extraordinary. I think That's a God story that we need to pass down to the next generation and the next generation, because we would not have this great country if it wasn't for God himself. Sometimes we like to think it's the politicians. Sometimes we like to think, oh, it's because the left or the right, all the political battles that go on. But you know what? Guess what? God is the one that's orchestrating his design, his providential plan for our great country. And he's using infallible people. We know that George Washington was not a perfect person. We know that. We know the politicians today are not perfect. But God is still at work, and he was at work back then. And you can see that in this story with George Washington. Well, hey, tune in tomorrow. We're going to unpack the third God story from the American Revolution. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Hit subscribe below. But more than that, click the link below, luso.tv. Watch our short film. That's how you can really help us. Together, you and I, together, we can educate 83% of Americans that don't understand why we fought the American Revolution. But I need your help. We need your help. So share it with your friends. Pay it forward. Send it to 1,000 of your friends. Okay, maybe 100, 10 of your friends. Pay it forward. Click the link, luso.tv.